Take a moment to look back at the textbooks that lined your shelves as a child. You were taught to memorize dates, names, and turning points, absorbing a curated narrative of the past as if it were absolute truth. But what if I told you that most of what you learned in history class is wrong? These are not deliberate lies designed to deceive you. They are simply stories repeated so often by so many people that nobody bothered to check them. They have become comfortable myths, calcified by time and repetition until the truth was buried beneath layers of convenient storytelling. Tonight, we strip away those layers. We go beneath the surface of the common narrative to confront the facts that were overlooked or smoothed over for the sake of a simpler lesson. We are here to fix the biggest ones, the foundational errors in your understanding of our shared past. Prepare yourself, because as we peel back the veil, you will find that the truth is far stranger than the myth. You might imagine them standing on the shoreline, their silhouettes looming against the grey mist, crowned with massive, sweeping horns that curve toward the heavens. But history tells a different story than myth. In truth, Vikings did not wear horned helmets. Despite what has been etched into our collective imagination for centuries, not one such artifact has ever been found in any archaeological dig or historical record. The image of the horned warrior was not forged in the heat of Viking raids, but in the creative fervor of the 1800s. It was an invention born from the imagination of a costume designer seeking to create a dramatic spectacle for a Wagner opera. For the real Vikings, practical survival dictated their attire. They wore plain leather or iron caps, functional headpieces designed to protect them from the brutal realities of combat, in the chaos of a shield wall. Horns would have been nothing more than a liability, easy handles for an enemy to grab or points that would catch on branches and debris. To wear them in battle would have been suicidal. The horns are a phantom of the stage, a masterpiece of fiction layered over a reality of iron and leather. Look closely at the frame. The reason this specific image has endured, the reason it remains etched into the collective consciousness of the public, is not because of its accuracy, but because of its drama. It was staged for impact, crafted to command your attention under the spotlight. When a costume is designed for the stage, it does more than clothe an actor. It creates a visual shorthand that overrides reality. This single piece of fabric, this deliberate aesthetic choice, rewrote how an entire civilization is remembered by history. You see the truth of human psychology here. Myth beats fact every time. When faced with two competing versions of the past, the one that provides the more striking silhouette wins. The facts may be dry and complex, but they are often invisible to the casual observer. The invented image, however, is vibrant and evocative. It fills the void left by missing records. It captures the imagination in a way that raw data never can. In the theater of history, the better picture always triumphs over the truth, proving that we do not remember what happened, we remember the most beautiful lie told about it. History has long whispered a lie about the stature of the man who reshaped the map of Europe. You may have been told that Napoleon was a diminutive figure, a tiny man whose height fueled his perceived insecurity. But the truth is far less dramatic. Records show that Napoleon stood at approximately 5 feet 7 inches, a height that was not only average, but arguably slightly above average for a Frenchman of his era. The myth of the little corporal was not a product of physical reality, but a masterpiece of psychological warfare and cultural confusion. It was fueled largely by British propaganda, designed to diminish his stature while magnifying his ambition in the eyes of the world. This narrative gained further traction through a simple, practical misunderstanding: the difference between French and English measurements. A few inches were lost in translation between systems of measurement, turning a man of respectable height into a caricature of smallness. You see now that the short myth was not a physical fact, but a fabrication of history, a shadow cast by his enemies that eclipsed the reality of the man himself. They wanted to diminish him before they could defeat him. They understood that to break a man of such towering ambition, they first had to shrink his stature in the eyes of the world. So they did it. They drew him small over and over again, etching a narrative of diminished proportions into the public consciousness until the caricature became the enduring memory. With every sketch and every satirical pamphlet, they manufactured a myth of a man who was physically lacking, ensuring that his image would be defined by perceived inadequacy rather than his actual stature. He marched across the continent with an iron will, ultimately conquering most of Europe and rewriting the maps of empires. Yet despite his absolute mastery over the geography of the land, he could not conquer the narrative of his own body. In the grand theater of history, Napoleon won the wars of the earth, but he lost the war for his own height. The ink of his enemies was more permanent than the triumphs of his sword, leaving a legacy where the man is forever haunted by the smallness they forced upon him. The popular image of Albert Einstein is often draped in the myth of the struggling student, a boy who could not grasp the complexities of numbers until they were laid out before him. But history tells a different story. In truth, Einstein never failed math. The mathematical foundations of his genius were established early. He had already mastered calculus by the age of 15, when he eventually heard the rumors circulating about his academic struggles with mathematics. He dismissed the narrative as completely absurd. The myth likely finds its roots in a simple misunderstanding, a misread grading scale at one specific Swiss school. What was once interpreted by others as a failure was merely a nuance of local notation, yet over time, the tale morphed into a legend of intellectual struggle. It serves as a reminder that even the most revolutionary minds are sometimes subject to the distortions of myth. You see the man who redefined the universe, but do not let the simplified stories of his youth obscure the reality of his early mastery. He didn't struggle with the numbers. He mastered them long before the world began to tell him he hadn't. There is a reason this particular narrative has endured for generations. It offers a profound sense of comfort. When you look at the towering intellect of the man often cited as the smartest person alive and see a narrative of struggle or oversight, it provides a psychological sanctuary. It suggests that if a genius could stumble, then perhaps your own failures aren't signs of inadequacy, they are merely part of the human condition. You find solace in the idea that even at the highest peaks of human intellect, perfection is not guaranteed. But look closer and the truth begins to unravel. This isn't an organic history, it is a fabrication. We didn't discover a crack in his brilliance, we carved one into his legacy. We manufactured a flaw in the smartest man alive, weaving a myth of fallibility into his biography specifically so we could feel better about our own mistakes. It is a convenient fiction, a protective veil draped over history to soothe our insecurities. You aren't looking at his true journey, you are looking at a version of him designed by us, crafted solely to make our imperfections feel less like failures and more like shared experiences. You might look at her golden crown and see a daughter of the Nile, but history reveals a different lineage. Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She did not share the ancient bloodline of the pharaohs. Instead, she belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek Macedonian rulers who seized power in the wake of conquest. They were the descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals, ruling as foreigners upon a land they did not truly inhabit from within, for 3 centuries. This dynasty held dominion over Egypt, presiding over its riches and its people while remaining strangers to its soul. They governed a civilization they chose not to integrate with, ruling the land without ever learning the Egyptian language. They were Greek royalty in an Egyptian throne room, masters of a kingdom that remained culturally distant from their own. In the halls of power, she sat as a queen of the Mediterranean world, yet even in her final days, she remained part of a dynasty that ruled Egypt while remaining fundamentally separate from its roots. Imagine standing before a throne that feels alien to your very bones. You are Cleopatra, and while the world sees you as the ultimate Egyptian icon, the truth of your lineage remains hidden beneath the golden linen. By blood, you are not a daughter of the Nile's ancient myths, you are Greek. You carry the lineage of the Ptolemies, a dynasty that ruled from a throne they inherited rather than one they were born into. Yet, it is this very fact that makes your reign so revolutionary. You became the first of your line to even bother learning the language of the people you ruled. While your predecessors remained distant figures, isolated by their own heritage, you chose to bridge the chasm. You spoke the tongue of the land, weaving yourself into the fabric of Egyptian life in a way no predecessor ever dared. The romance films forget this detail entirely, scrubbing away the complexity of your identity to create a myth. They sell you as a local legend, ignoring the fact that you were a Greek queen who mastered a foreign world to claim it as your own. History is often written by the victors, and sometimes it is rewritten by those seeking a villain. You might believe you know the Queen of France, the woman whose name became synonymous with decadence and indifference, but the most famous line attributed to her was never spoken by her lips. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." The truth of these words is far older than her reign. The phrase actually appeared in a book written when she was still a child, existing in the pages of literature years before she ever set foot on French soil. It was an old proverb, already circulating in the public consciousness long before she took the throne. Yet, as the fires of revolution began to consume the monarchy, the words were weaponized against her. They were pinned upon her like a brand, transformed into a convenient lie to justify her execution and solidify her image as a symbol of aristocratic apathy. You see not a confession of her character, but a masterpiece of propaganda crafted by an angry nation looking for a face to blame for its suffering. Imagine her standing before the towering blade, not for what she did, but for what they claimed she thought. She was sent to the guillotine partly on the strength of words she never spoke, a ghost of a sentiment conjured by others to fit a political mold. In the heat of upheaval, history becomes a weapon of convenience. Once a story serves a revolution, the truth stops mattering. It is discarded like a tattered garment in favor of a narrative that fuels the fire of the movement. The people demanded a villain, and they crafted one from her silence. They took her quietude and recast it as defiance, turning a void into a manifesto. In the end, she was consumed by the machinery of an idea that replaced her flesh and blood. She became a symbol, a hollow vessel for the passions of the crowd. The quote outlived the woman it killed, echoing through the halls of time while her actual voice remained buried in the soil. She is gone. But the myth remains, a haunting reminder of how easily a lie can become a legend when the crown is traded for a cause. For centuries, a myth has endured, a haunting image of thousands of enslaved people, chained in bondage, toiling under a scorching sun to move the stones for the horizon-spanning monuments. But look closer at the evidence left behind in the sand, and that narrative begins to crumble. The truth revealed by modern archaeology tells a different story altogether. These pyramids were not built by slaves. Instead, excavations have uncovered sprawling worker villages teeming with life and organization. Within these settlements, archaeologists discovered bustling bakeries and breweries capable of feeding a massive workforce, alongside evidence of sophisticated medical care for those who fell ill or injured on the job. Even more telling are the tombs of honor found in the shadow of the great structures. These were not the graves of the forgotten, but the final resting places of people held in high esteem. These were skilled, paid laborers, many of whom served as volunteers, driven by purpose and pride. They were not a forced labor force, but a dedicated community of craftsmen who built these monuments with precision and intent. For decades, you have been fed a cinematic lie, etched into the collective imagination by Hollywood's lens, and a fundamental misreading of ancient texts. You were told that these monolithic structures were forged in blood and sweat under the lash of a whip, that a desperate, enslaved populace was coerced into dragging limestone blocks across the desert sands. But history tells a different story, and the truth is far more impressive than the myth. The pyramids were not constructed by the broken spirits of slaves, but by one of the best organized workforces the ancient world ever saw. Imagine instead a massive, highly structured community, skilled laborers, paid workers, and organized crews moving with purpose and precision. They weren't driven by fear, but by a sophisticated logistical machine that mobilized thousands in a feat of engineering and social coordination. When you look past the Hollywood tropes and toward the archaeological reality, the scale of their ambition becomes clear. It wasn't just a triumph of stone and mortar, it was a masterpiece of human organization, proving that these builders were not victims of a cruel system, but architects of an unprecedented civilization. For centuries, a myth has circulated through the halls of history and the pages of textbooks. The belief that the Great Wall of China is so monumental that it stands as a visible scar across the Earth, observable even from the vast reaches of space. But when you look toward the stars and peer down at our planet, the truth reveals a different reality. You must understand that despite its legendary scale, the Great Wall is not visible from space with the naked eye. Astronauts have traveled into orbit and confirmed this fact repeatedly. From their vantage point above the atmosphere, the structure remains hidden, not because it is small in length, but because it is so narrow. Furthermore, the materials used to construct the wall blend seamlessly with the terrain. Its color is nearly identical to the soil and stone of the land surrounding it. It does not stand out as a distinct line against the horizon. You cannot see it from orbit. The myth fades away, replaced by the stark reality that even the most massive human achievements can be swallowed by the sheer scale of the Earth's surface. Imagine a truth so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that it feels like an immutable law of nature. For decades, we lived under the assumption that this specific detail regarding the cosmos was an absolute certainty, a fundamental building block of our understanding of the heavens. Yet, when you trace the lineage of this belief back to its origin, the foundation crumbles. The claim was first printed in a book in 1932. Think of the era. It was a time before any human had ever left the atmosphere, before rockets pierced the clouds, and long before we could peer into the void with modern eyes. It was an era when space remained a mystery to be imagined rather than a frontier to be explored. We accepted a fact about space that was essentially invented before spaceflight even existed. We were captivated by a narrative born of imagination, mistaking a literary invention for a celestial reality. We believed a lie told in the silence of the pre-space age, carrying it forward into the modern era as if it were an ancient truth, never realizing that our knowledge was built upon a fiction written before we ever took flight. You might imagine the flickering orange flames of a pyre rising against the dark Massachusetts woods, but history tells a different story of how the trials reached their end. In the shadow of the 1690s, the accused witches of Salem were not burned. While the image of the stake has permeated our modern imagination, it was a practice rooted in European tradition, far from the shores of the New World. In colonial Massachusetts, the machinery of justice took a different, more somber form, the gallows. 19 individuals were condemned and ultimately hanged, their lives ended by the rope rather than the flame. For those who did not face the noose, the toll was still heavy. One individual was crushed with stones, while several others perished within the confines of their jail cells, succumbing to the elements or disease before their cases could reach a final verdict. The fire you might expect to see in your mind is a ghost of old-world customs, replaced in this colony by the stark reality of hanging and the silent, heavy toll of imprisonment. Think of the image that has haunted your imagination for centuries, a figure bound and condemned, consumed by flames in a public square. You see it in the history books and the cinema alike, but this visceral spectacle of being burned at the stake was not an original American tradition. It was a haunting aesthetic borrowed from the old world of Europe, imported across the ocean because fire is more cinematic than rope. Fire provides a visual crescendo. It offers a spectacle of agony that sticks in the mind far longer than the silent, clinical efficiency of a hanging. Even our nightmares are subject to editing for the sake of drama. We have replaced the mundane reality of justice with a more theatrical brand of terror because we crave the theater of the pyre. But if you look past the Hollywood veneer and peel back the layers of myth, the truth is far more haunting. The real Salem was not defined by roaring flames or public spectacles. It was quieter. It was a community suffocated by suspicion, a town governed by whispers in the dark. There is something infinitely more chilling about a quiet, systematic persecution than any bonfire ever could be. Step into the dust of the arena, where the roar of the crowd masks a stark economic reality hidden behind the spectacle of blood. You might imagine every clash of steel as a desperate struggle for survival, but for the men in the sand, the stakes were often defined by gold rather than glory. These gladiators were not disposable soldiers. They were elite athletes and high-stakes investments. They were meticulously trained, heavily fed, and housed in specialized barracks for years before ever stepping into the sun. To the owners, a gladiator was a valuable asset, a commodity of significant cost to produce and maintain. Consequently, a death in the arena was rarely a desired outcome. It was a devastating financial loss, a waste of resources that could have been harvested for seasons to come. You see the violence of the combat, but you must understand the ledger behind it. Most fights did not end with a final blow, but with a submission, a strategic conclusion designed to preserve the investment while satisfying the crowd's thirst for drama. In the arena, survival was not just a personal choice, it was an economic necessity. Step into the arena and look past the gore to see what these fighters truly were. They were the icons of their age. Many gladiators were not mere condemned prisoners, but true celebrities of the Roman world. They commanded massive fan bases, cultivated public personas, and even secured lucrative endorsements from those seeking to ride the wave of their fame. For many, the arena was a career path built on skill and endurance, leading to long, storied careers in the sands. You might imagine every match ending in a grisly execution, but history tells a different story. The infamous thumbs-down death sentence was the exception, not the rule. It was a rare, final decree rather than an everyday occurrence. In reality, even this ancient blood sport was more business than slaughter. It was a calculated industry where victory provided longevity and loss was a logistical hurdle for the organizers. When you look closely at the spectacle, you see that the gladiator's life was often governed by the economics of entertainment, where the goal was to keep the stars alive, providing a show that could be sold, repeated, and celebrated over years, not just days. History has painted a portrait of madness, a caricature of a tyrant who watched his city crumble in flames while he played a haunting melody on a fiddle. But if you look past the myth, the truth is far more grounded. Nero did not fiddle while Rome burned. In fact, the very instrument of your imagination would not be invented for another 15 centuries. It was a physical impossibility for him to hold such an object in his hands. The records tell a different story. One stripped of poetic malice and replaced by logistical urgency. They suggest that Nero was actually away when the Great Fire first began to consume the streets. Rather than indulging in a spectacle of destruction, he rushed back to the heart of the chaos. He did not stand idle as the heat rose. He arrived to organize relief efforts and coordinate shelter for those fleeing the inferno. The image of the indifferent emperor is a ghost of folklore, while the historical record reveals a man navigating the frantic reality of a city in crisis. History is often written not by the victims of a regime, but by those who sought to dismantle it from within. In the twilight of his reign, Nero's legacy was systematically shredded by a pack of senators, men who loathed his rule and sought to bury his name under a mountain of malice. They crafted a narrative so potent that it survived the collapse of empires. They planted a catchy lie, a single, scandalous image of a man dancing amidst the flames while Rome burned. And that fabrication took root in the collective consciousness of humanity. It stuck for 2,000 years, morphing from a contemporary insult into an eternal historical truth. You might believe you know the monster of the Roman stage, but look closer at the record. Nero committed real crimes. He was a man of violence and ambition whose actions caused genuine suffering. Yet in the tapestry of time, the one thing everyone knows about him, the specific, infamous act that defines his name in every textbook today, never actually happened. It is a ghost story told by his enemies, a fiction that became more real than the man himself. Look closely at the world around you and notice the pattern emerging from the noise. Observe how the layers of reality are stripped away, replaced by substitutions designed to grip the senses. A costume worn to mask an identity, a cartoon simplified to provide easy entertainment, a propaganda pamphlet crafted to steer your conviction, and a Hollywood script engineered to dictate your emotions. Each of these is a vehicle for a fiction that feels more tangible than the cold facts of existence. You see it because you are watching the mechanism of fabrication at work. The myth always wins, not because it is accurate, but because it is inherently simpler and far more dramatic than the truth. Truth is often jagged, inconvenient, and quiet. Myth is polished, convenient, and loud. You must realize that history isn't what happened in the raw, unedited moments of the past. History is what got repeated until the echoes became the only story left to tell. When a lie is told enough times by enough voices, it loses its status as a falsehood and becomes the foundation upon which you build your understanding of reality. The next time you sit in a silent classroom or leaf through a polished volume of history, and someone presents you with a clean, dramatic narrative, a story where the lines are sharp and the heroes are flawless, stop for a moment. Pause before you accept it as absolute truth. Instead, ask just one question: who first told this story and what did they get out of it? This isn't just a pedantic exercise, it is a vital tool for survival in an age of polished myths. By identifying the narrator, you uncover the motive behind the prose. Was the story crafted to solidify a crown, to justify a war, or to build a national identity from the ashes of defeat? Every word written by the victors serves a purpose, and every omission is often as telling as what remains on the page. That single question acts as a key, turning in a lock that has been rusted shut by decades of convenient retelling. It strips away the veneer of simplicity to reveal the complexities beneath. Ask it, and you will find yourself traveling closer to the raw, complicated truth than any textbook could ever take you. If this moment just rewired even one single thing you were certain was true, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel now. Every week, we take a piece of history that everyone knows, those foundational myths and common narratives passed down through generations, and we peel back the layers to show you what actually happened. We dig beneath the surface of schoolbooks and textbook tropes to uncover the raw, unvarnished truth. You might find yourself questioning your perspective as the echoes of the past are replaced by the reality of what occurred. Because the truth is a jagged thing, often hidden behind polished stories for convenience or comfort, but we believe you deserve to see the grit beneath the polish. The real past isn't a simple timeline, it is complex, chaotic, and unpredictable. It is far more fascinating than any simplified story told in a classroom. You will find that the real past is always stranger than the version they taught you. Join us as we strip away the myths to reveal the truth.